Go ahead. Thank you. You have to punch the button.
Good afternoon, Chairman Simpson, Chairman Bowles, and distinguished member of the Commission. My name is Véronique de Rugy. I'm a research senior fellow at the Bipartisan Center at George Mason University, where I study tax and fiscal policy and the federal budget process and the implication of government spending on economic growth. It is an honor to appear before you today to discuss a matter of critical importance to this nation. This Commission has a historical opportunity to correct many years of irresponsible fiscal policy and set us on a path of sustainability. As you form your recommendation, over the next few months, you will consider many proposals, several of which you've heard this afternoon. In order to help you evaluate those ideas, I suggest 3 criteria that you can apply to those proposals and to your final recommendation. Criteria that tell you whether those recommendations will be the solution to our fiscal troubles. Remember, recommendations that won't work are not solutions. These criteria, which are explained in detail in my written testimony, are: first, do the recommendations include real spending cuts? Second, do the recommendations prohibit exceptions for political favored programs? And 3, do the recommendation address accounting tricks and budget gimmicks? These criteria address the 3 major issues that put us in our current state of fiscal irresponsibility. We have overspent, we have made excuses for our overspending, and we have lied about our overspending. So first, we have overspent. If the Commission wishes to forestall financial catastrophe, it must recommend that the government of the United States get to the root of our deficit problem. Revenue is not the problem. Spending is the problem. Increasing revenue alone will not reduce the deficit. The Congressional Budget Office concluded that the federal government would need to raise tax rate by substantial amounts to finance projected spending. From 10% to 25% for the lowest bracket, 25% to 63% for the middle, and 35% to 88% for the highest bracket. The CBO concluded that this tax rate would significantly reduce economic activity, create serious problems with tax evasion, and that revenues would fall significantly short of the amount needed to finance the growth in spending. These needed tax increase is too great to be achieved through higher income tax. Some suggested then a value-added tax would address the country's need for revenue. The data, however, reveal a quite different reality. A recent study by Florida State University's Randy Holcomb finds that a VAT would slow economic growth and that the net effect on taxes would be almost no additional revenue. While a VAT is a powerful source of government revenue, initially, as it sets in, GDP growth slow and income and sale tax revenue slow as well. So in other words, the revenue increase of the VAT are offset by revenue decrease in other taxes. Tax reform is needed, but the fact that we have overspent remains the main problem. Second, we have made excuses for our spending. We have claimed to cut spending, but we have spared favored program. For change to occur, all areas of spending must be on the table: defense, entitlement, Medicare, Medicaid, everything. For the last 15 years, the federal government has sheltered some 80% of the budget from cuts. This trend cannot continue. Finally, we have lied about spending. All governments, federal, state, and local, have used budget tricks and gimmicks to put off real fiscal reform and to hide the actual cost of out-of-control spending. The use of the emergency supplemental process in the last 10 years, for example, is a good example of these lies. In the midst of the crisis, the American people have changed the way they address their fiscal situation. They've reduced their spending, they've stopped borrowing. When will their governments catch up? American people are counting on you to find real solution. My 3 criteria should help you choose the best course of action. Please do not disappoint them. They've been disappointed enough. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to helping this commission as much as possible.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bowles, Chairman Simpson, members of the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Mark Rosenblum. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute. My testimony concerns the effects of immigration on the U.S. budget and the goals of this commission. Let me begin by summarizing two facts about immigration and the economy that have been touched on by some of your previous witnesses. First, immigration increases U.S. productivity and contributes to overall economic growth. Immigrants flow into productive sectors, employers adjust to changes in the labor supply, and the economy produces more goods and services. A second effect of immigration is to boost real wages for about 90% of U.S. workers. This finding is less intuitive, but wages increase because immigrants complement U.S. skill profiles, allowing natives to specialize in higher-paying work, and because immigrant spending and investment mean that about one additional new job is created for each immigrant added to the economy. So what do these economic facts mean for the work of this commission? Narrowly defined, immigration generally reduces the U.S. deficit because immigrants pay more in taxes than they receive in services. Even though many immigrants have low incomes, all immigrants pay taxes, including in most cases federal payroll taxes, and adult immigrants are ineligible for most federal welfare and other spending programs until they've had their green cards for at least 5 years. But the overall fiscal impact of immigration also reflects our policy choices. So how can we maximize the economic gains from immigration to take full advantage of these benefits? Current U.S. policy is not designed to attract the best and brightest workers or to ensure that employers have access to needed workers. And many of our policies work directly against these goals. Maximizing the benefits of immigration would require a policy that facilitates the inflow and the integration of the most talented and complementary immigrant workers. We also should increase the proportion of immigrant workers in legal status. For decades, U.S. policy has tolerated unauthorized employment. Yet unauthorized workers are more likely to work off the books, they're less able to take full advantage of their skills, and they suffer a wage penalty compared to legal workers. Inefficiency and lost tax revenues increase over time because unauthorized immigrants avoid making long-term investments in their own human capital or as entrepreneurs. So the second policy question that this commission should consider is how to reduce discretionary spending on immigration enforcement. The politics of immigration make it easier for lawmakers to focus on enforcement than to address the root causes of unauthorized migration. These political dynamics have produced substantial growth in U.S. migration control budgets, but historically this spending has proven ineffective at reducing illegal migration. So I urge this commission to weigh in on the ongoing U.S. immigration debate, which consists of two well-defined positions with starkly different fiscal implications. One view holds that the enforcement strategies of the last quarter century have been the right approach in principle and that we simply should do a better job of enforcing existing laws. Taken at face value, this enforcement-first approach would require substantial additional spending on border and interior enforcement to shut down illegal inflows and remove millions of existing unauthorized immigrants with uncertain and possibly damaging effects on economic growth. The alternative approach is comprehensive immigration reform, which combines serious migration enforcement with a legalization program for most unauthorized immigrants and with visa reform to rationalize family and employment-based flows. Comprehensive reform is the more fiscally sound approach for at least 4 reasons. Legalization of existing unauthorized immigrants would increase their families' earning power, their spending, and their tax payments. In contrast with enforcement first, legalization would pay for itself as fines and fees would cover the costs of the program. These increased tax revenues and fees are why the CBO found that the 2006 Senate immigration bill would have increased net federal revenues by about $65 billion over 10 years. Fixing the visa system would also promote long-term economic growth with higher earnings and tax revenues throughout the U.S. economy. And perhaps most importantly from a fiscal perspective, comprehensive reform would create the conditions for effective enforcement at a realistic cost. While the system will always require investment in enforcement, legalization would take hundreds of thousands of people out of the costly detention and removal system, and visa reform would give prospective immigrants real incentives to wait their turn, easing the burden on border and interior enforcement in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Chairman Bowles, Chairman Simpson, members of the commission, also Director Reed and your staff, thank you for extending an invitation to the general public to provide comments. We enjoy an unusual privilege of speaking before people who have actually balanced a federal budget and been architects of welfare reform. My name is William McClellan. I do generation planning for an electric utility, but I am speaking about my own concerns. Budget Director Orzog has said that the overriding economic policy of the administration became to boost economic growth to prevent the economy from falling off the proverbial cliff. Doing so meant temporarily sustaining higher budget deficits. I agree with this logic. I also agree with the same logic in reverse, that spending cuts will cool the economy when necessary. This is the premise of my presentation. Chairman Bowles mentioned earlier, when do you pull the trigger on these spending cuts so that you don't hurt the economy? I'm proposing that when the economy heats up, in lieu of rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, we have equivalent cuts in federal government spending. The Fed posts its interest rate increase. Congress would then have 30 days to enact a package of spending cuts. If Congress chooses not to act, the Fed rate hike kicks in. To illustrate why this is needed, imagine landscapers who want to expand their businesses in Rock Hill, South Carolina, Congressman Spratt's district. They show up at an auto dealership in Charlotte, North Carolina, and looking at 5 pickup trucks. A federal agency buyer is there and is planning to buy those same 5 trucks. This is a classic inflationary scenario. Too much money is chasing the same products and/or services. So the Fed has anticipated this scenario and has raised interest rates. So who doesn't show up to buy those trucks? It's the private sector. Have we dealt with inflation? Yes, but at what cost? We now have a smaller private sector that must support a bigger government. If instead we tell the federal agency buyer, you stay home, come back in a year, then we have the same disinflationary effect, but now the private sector has a chance to grow. Over the course of a year, those expanded businesses pay more taxes to their local school districts, to their state, and to the federal government. At the end of a year, perhaps one of those trucks can be purchased outright, based entirely on the increased taxes from these businesses and their employees. This would reduce state and federal deficits 4 ways. It would allow business to continue to grow, increasing the tax base for all taxing entities. It would keep rates low and reduce borrowing costs for government. It would keep mortgage rates low, increasing construction spending, also raising the local tax base. It would reduce the cost of the federal government directly, reducing deficits. If enacted by central banks of Germany, France, and the U.S., interest rates could be kept low, so countries teetering on the brink of fiscal insolvency could continue their recoveries. It would be a grievous mistake to toss aside this plan because the federal government is too big to respond in time. Businesses can change quickly by cutting back on overtime, and etc. But we have agents of change like yourselves who can make government as flexible as we ask business to be. So what I'm proposing is that we have a package of federal spending cuts that can be implemented in lieu and equivalent to those quarter-point incremental rate hike increases by the Federal Reserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bowles and Senator Simpson, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity of talking to you briefly. My name is Charles Lyle. I'm an independent citizen, just making some comments. I'm keenly aware of the precarious position the Social Security program is currently under and the need to reduce possibly some coverage. When Social Security was started in 1935 under the FDR administration, it was not meant as a complete retirement program, did not encompass the myriad areas that it currently covers. As a result of these programs and as a result of the changing demographics, the program now faces a $28 trillion unfunded obligation. Obviously, some changes have to be addressed to protect this program's futures. This may include additional taxes, higher retirement ages, reduced benefits, whatever, and I support many of these changes. However, there are 2 current provisions which I would suggest are both discriminatory and unfair. These are the windfall elimination provision, the WEP, and the GPO, the government pension offset provision. Under these provisions, a person retiring may lose significant income just at a point in life when a stable income is required. Currently, there are 7 states in the United States that had elected for their state employees not to pay into the Social Security system, and these are the ones that where the most impact occurs. A person, for example, works a part of their lives in a position paying into the Social Security system, and as part is a state employee. Their spouse works their entire career in a position paying Social Security. Then the spouse dies. The survivor is entitled to spousal benefits even though they may continue to work full-time as a state employee. But the kicker comes when they retire, and the need for a steady income becomes much more evident. Either the GPO or the WEP kicks in, and their income is reduced by a ratio of $2 for every $3 from the state retirement. I would cite 2 examples of how this works. I know these both personally. One case is with a woman whose husband, she worked for 30 years as a teacher, and her now deceased husband worked his entire career in the private sector paying Social Security. As a result of the GPO, she now draws $12 a month in Social Security benefits. A second example is a widow who worked part of her life in the private sector. She married. After marriage, she had a disabled child, and she decided to go back to work as a school secretary to help with the household expenses. Her husband worked his entire career in the private sector paying into Social Security. When he died, although she was still employed and did not retire until into her 70s, she was able to collect all of his survivor benefits. However, upon her retirement last year, she came under WEP, and his Social Security benefits were kicked out. They looked back at her Social Security payments that she made. As a result, her benefits were reduced, her state benefits were reduced, or the Social Security benefits were reduced by $800 a month. I would suggest that this is discriminatory, it's unfair, and needs to be looked at. Currently, there is in the House a House Bill number 235, sponsored by Congressman LaTourette. This House bill has been in existence in committee for a long period of time, and they can't even get it out of committee. I would suggest that at the very least, this should be looked at and at least brought to a vote for an up or down vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a next group, please.
Let her rip. No. We're pleased to have you here. And just introduce yourself and your organization. And could you hit the button there? Strom would say, hit the machine.
Co-Chair Simpson and Bowles and distinguished members of the Commission, I'm Steve Strobridge with the Military Officers Association of America. MOA appreciates your challenge in addressing the nation's deficit problems. My focus will be on military and veterans compensation. MOA believes strongly that there's a fundamental difference between social insurance programs open to every American and military benefits earned by decades of service and sacrifice. While means testing may be reasonable for the former, it would be a counterproductive performance penalty for programs like military retired pay, which reward length of service and successful competition for promotion. Means testing service earned benefits, in effect, denies that the service had any inherent value to the nation. While baby boomer demographics drive Medicare and Social Security concerns, there's no such problem with the military population, which will remain roughly steady for the next 20 years and then decline. Those citing military personnel cost growth over the last decade overlook that personnel spending was severely depressed a decade ago when the services had serious retention problems following years of pay raise caps and major retirement and health care cutbacks. Congress incurred some new costs in addressing those problems, but that period of rapid growth is behind us, and we won't see major new fixes in the years ahead. Many studies have proposed cutting military retirement to make it look more like civilian retirement. And a 1986 law change actually reduced retired pay value by 25% for new entrants. But as defense leaders predicted at the time, it had to be repealed 14 years later when it was found to be causing retention problems. In short, civilianizing military retirement doesn't work because military service conditions, as we see in the newspaper every day, just can't be civilianized. The unique military retirement benefits are the government's reciprocal and essential commitment that the relatively few people willing to accept those arduous service conditions for a career will be provided a benefits package commensurate with that extended sacrifice. Absent the career-drawing power of current military retirement benefits, sustaining the career force through the combat environment of the last decade would have been impossible. On military health care, some propose making beneficiaries pay a fixed percentage of DoD health care costs. MOA doesn't support that, mainly because military health programs are built for readiness, not for efficiency. The 3 separate military health systems and 3 separate civilian contractors compete independently for funding and work poorly together. DoD managers often ignore obvious cost-saving options, and deploying doctors in wartime necessarily forces patients into more expensive civilian care. MOA isn't saying that health fees should never be increased, but comparing only military versus civilian cash fees ignores that military people pay far higher premiums than any civilian, but pay them upfront and in kind through decades of service and sacrifice. MOA believes that should be acknowledged by limiting the percentage fee increase in any year to the percentage growth in pay. No less important than fees is benefits delivery. Many military beneficiaries have trouble finding doctors to take them because the military TRICARE system is one of the lowest paying healthcare programs in the country. One of the most frequently proposed cost-cutting initiatives involves reducing or means testing annual COLAs. MOA believes strongly that regular COLAs are fundamental to sustaining real purchasing power. Curtailing them dooms beneficiaries, and especially long-living beneficiaries, to long-term geometrically progressive devaluation of their earned compensation. Whatever else may be done in the name of savings, periodic restoration of full value purchasing power as measured by the CPI must remain a fundamental commitment of the nation. Thank you for this opportunity to present MOA's views on these important issues.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for your service.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bowles, Chairman Simpson, members of the Commission. My name is Steve Moorhead, and I'm from Dedham, Massachusetts. There are 3 critical issues facing our country: a growing deficit, reduced personal savings, and an enormous national debt. My 3-part proposal enables Congress to address each of these issues. First, it increases taxes to reduce the deficit. Second, it increases personal retirement assets. And third, it reduces interest payments on our federal debt and on our dependence on non-U.S. holders of federal debt. So how does my proposal work? While personal income tax rates would go up, taxpayers can choose to buy a U.S. savings bond instead of paying the tax increase. The price of the bonds would be tied to a taxpayer's bracket. So wealthier taxpayers pay more for their savings bonds. For example, if a taxpayer in the highest tax bracket has an increase in taxes of $50,000, that taxpayer would have an option to purchase a $50,000 U.S. savings bond for $100,000, thereby eliminating the increased tax. Now, by requiring taxpayers to hold these bonds until age 65 at a minimum, or suffer a penalty for early sale, overall retirement assets will increase. And these bonds, the revenues from these bonds will go exclusively to reducing the federal debt. And the interest payments on these bonds will be lower, which will mean a reduced cost of debt service and less reliance on federal holders of debt. And the U.S. Treasury will retain fiscal flexibility under this proposal because they will have the right to call these savings bonds at any time, and they will have the right to pay out over up to a 4-year period. So, who are the winners under this proposal? The deficit improves as tax revenues are increased, the federal debt is reduced, and the federal debt service costs are decreased. The current generation's retirement assets are increased, and our children inherit a healthier U.S. balance sheet. Who are the losers? In the short term, Santa Claus. And that would be for the consumer society. There'd be fewer presents under the tree, as retail America would suffer under this. And there would be less private capital available to invest in our economy. So, in closing, Congress must once again appeal to Americans to sacrifice for their country, the way we did in our successful Liberty Bond campaigns of World War I and World War II. These save for ourselves, save for America bonds could, one, improve financial literacy across the income spectrum by increasing the number of Americans who privately own their retirement savings. Two, repair America's balance sheet, allowing us to better compete globally. And three, build a stronger economic foundation because more Americans will have a direct stake in the fiscal future of our government. So I believe the Save for Ourselves, Save for America bonds have the potential to engage us as taxpayers, to understand that we are all in this together and we all have to sacrifice and save in order to ensure that the world's last best hope is protected and preserved for generations to come. The details of my proposal in an earlier submission, and I very much also want to thank you for providing a public forum for Americans to offer their thoughts.
Thank you. I'd actually read your proposal earlier, so thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Go ahead.
There, now it's ready. Here we go. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here, especially on such a long day. I am Janice Gregory, the current president of the National Academy of Social Insurance, and it's over 800 experts on social insurance. This commission faces a difficult task, and we want to commend you for your dedication and your commitment. Governments establish universal compulsory social insurance programs when insuring against certain risk serves societal purposes. As agrarian economies shifted to wage economies, such programs were established around the world to address the serious economic insecurity that arises whenever most individuals work for wages. Programs such as Social Security introduced the idea of preventing economic insecurity through participation in advance of need. This innovation protected families, avoided disincentives to personal savings, prevented the thrifty from having to pay for the improvident, allowed workers to risk new or different employment, protected mass purchasing power, and worked in a counter-cyclical manner to lessen swings in the economy. The Social Security law was enacted as a necessary underpinning in the modern world for individual liberty, for free enterprise, and for democracy. Regarding the Commission's task, however, Social Security has run surpluses since 1984 and is not a cause of the current problems. While the general fund has shifted from an annual surplus of $86 billion in 2000 to a deficit of $1.5 trillion last year, the Social Security program has amassed a reserve now at $2.5 trillion, expected to climb to about $4 trillion over the next decade. It is important to recognize that this reserve was built through dedicated taxes paid by lower and middle income workers and their employers and invested in special Treasury securities. These securities are very real obligations of the federal government owed to America's workers. Thus, for the Social Security program, there really is no short or medium-term challenge. The challenge for the Commission is to put the general fund in better shape. Regarding the long term, Social Security has a modest impact. It will increase by about 1% of GDP over the long term, compared to some estimates of, say, 16% for Medicare and Medicaid, which themselves are driven by increases in national health costs. Social Security's long-term shortfall is 0.65% of GDP, which is virtually the same as the cost of extending the 2001 and 3 tax cuts for the top 1% of taxpayers. If the Commission chooses to address Social Security's modest long-term shortfall, I commend the Academy's publication, which is available to all of the Commission's members, Fixing Social Security, Adequate Benefits, Adequate Financing, which includes ideas for revenue, ideas for benefit improvements, and ideas for benefit reductions. In looking at it, I hope you also keep in mind that under current law, future benefits already are going to be reduced because of the increase in age that's pending, that comes in fully in 2022, and because of the increasing bite of Medicare premiums. Today's workers face increasing individual risk. With a $14,000 average annual benefit, Social Security is a modest program, but the most important source of income for most of our elderly. And so a third of benefits go to survivors and disability. It provides an annuity based on overall wage growth in the economy with 100% survivor and disability protection and an inflation rider. A modest benefit, but one far out of the reach of almost all in the open market. I thank you for your time, and I'll be pleased to answer questions now or later. Thank you.
Thank you. Commission staff did make your document available to us, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We could have the next group, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Chairman Bowles and Simpson, thank you for allowing me to speak to you on behalf of the 4.6 million federal workers and annuitants represented by the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association regarding your role in trying to achieve fiscal balance. There are over 2.3 million retirees and survivors who depend on either the civil service retirement system or the newer federal employees retirement system. These two systems differ from state and local public plans and the larger Social Security program. Many consider federal civilian retirement similar to other entitlement programs. However, there is one significant difference. Civil service retirement and health benefits are earned by employees and designed to attract and retain a skilled workforce. They are not modeled on social insurance, health-based, or means-tested. Workers make contributions to both their retirement benefits and their health coverage. Once they become annuitants, they continue to pay the same portion of their health insurance premiums. The Federal Service has always been a program of shared costs between the agency and the worker. Regrettably, the public is often misinformed, believing federal employees get free or overly generous benefits. In fact, federal workers participate in the Social Security system under FERS, redesigned in 1986 to provide the social insurance benefit, supplemented by a smaller defined benefit plan and a 401k-like thrift savings plan similar to the private sector. Younger FERS annuitants receive no cost of living adjustment COLA, and the COLA at age 62 is CPI -1. I mention this because we are all concerned about the long-term fiscal ramifications of an aging nation. Consider this, however. While Social Security and health entitlements will consume 2 percentage points more of the GDP over the next 10 years, Civil service retirement share will shrink by 0.06%. Federal civilian retirement costs are more related to the size of the federal workforce than the aging population. Federal civilian retirement does not face the same solvency challenges as Social Security and Medicare. Indeed, the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Trust Fund is fully funded and actuarially sound. According to the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service, using a 75-year projection period, the Office of Personnel Management estimates that the total value of securities in the trust fund will grow throughout the projection period, ultimately reaching about 4.2 times payroll, or nearly 18 times the amount needed to pay annual benefits. In summary, by definition under the financing arrangements set out in current law, the system is not now and never will be insolvent or without adequate budget authority for payment of benefits. Again, because the budget cost of the system can never exceed the cost of monthly benefits to living annuitants, the cash required from the Treasury or taxpayers will never exceed the cost of those monthly payments. Nonetheless, federal civilian programs get swept into budget-cutting exercises, sometimes in contrast to other entitlements. In previous decades, annuitants lost $50 billion in deferred, reduced, and canceled COLAs, but Social Security COLAs were unaffected. Your mission is to produce a long-term trend of fiscal balance. In federal personnel programs, that goal must be balanced against the skills, retention, and productivity of the next generation of employees. Also a long-term balance. Outside reductions diminish the federal workforce needed to meet the complexities of globalization and to make government more efficient and responsive to the taxpayers. Please keep these competing elements in mind as you develop a new fiscal blueprint for America. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennelly?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Bowles and Chairman Simpson and Dr. Rivlin. Thank you very much, and Congressman Reed. Thank you for inviting me to be here today, and I'm going to limit my remarks to Social Security. You are faced with a difficult mission of finding ways to reduce the deficit. And on behalf of the 3 million members of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, of which I am the president, I am here today to talk about. I'm here to urge you, while you are considering your macroeconomics and your deficit numbers, please do not lose sight of the millions of individual people whose quality of life depends on every decision you're going to make on this commission. Many of my points are fairly simple, but they're forgotten in the face of today's fiscal crisis. More than 9 out of 10 American workers participate in Social Security. Thus, changes you make in this program will affect virtually every person in this country. Today's 52 million Americans receive benefits every month from Social Security, and many rely heavily on these benefits for their income. Social Security today creates a stable, basic income for all families when the primary breadwinner is no longer able to work because of age, disability, or death. Social Security allows the elderly to live out their lives in dignity with a basic benefit that reflects the contributions they make to the program during their many, many years of working. But despite the importance to the American people, Social Security is not a generous program. I keep hearing how generous it is, how we can't afford it. But the vast majority of seniors are not wealthy. They are average Americans who worked hard all their lives. Their median income in retirement is $18,000. The average Social Security retirement benefit is $13,800, and for women, it's $11,000. And about 40% of the average seniors on Social Security, it goes to health care. About 40% now are going even with Medicare. Most importantly, Social Security will be just as critical to younger generations. I know a lot of economists always think the next generation is going to do much better, but the accidents and vicissitudes of life are always there. Jobs with traditional pensions are a thing of the past. Only about half of today's workforce has access to any kind of retirement plan through their employee. And the value of the largest retirement asset millions of workers had was destroyed in the real estate bubble. What many of today's workers have is their Social Security, and there simply isn't much room to reduce these benefits. I was in Congress, as you were, Senator Simpson, in 1983, during the last major Social Security reform. We made a number of changes designed to fund the benefits of the baby boomers when they began retiring in the early 2000s. We made some very tough decisions, as you're going to have to make. That reform was immensely successful. It extended the program's solvency for over half a century, and the surplus we built was invested in the safest asset possible, special interest Treasury bonds, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America. I know it's customary for some today to disparage the trust funds as if they don't exist, but those bonds are no different than any other debt instrument issued by the United States government, and I find it incomprehensible that Congress might someday agree to pay back our foreign neighbors before, and other people own the bonds, such as you and I, before honoring the debt it owes to the American people. I understand the drive to reduce the deficit. Frankly, I'm as appalled by the $1.4 trillion in red ink. I can't believe it's $1 trillion. But Social Security did not contribute one thin dime to this deficit. It should not be used to make up for the mistakes of the past. The American people do not support, and I have taken polls, I've spent some money on some polls recently. I've done focus groups, all the things I don't like. But I'll tell you, the American workers rightfully see Social Security as their money, not the government's. It represents their hard-earned dollars that came out of each and every paycheck throughout their working lives. They are even willing to pay more. They're willing to pay more to strengthen the program for their children and their grandchildren. They flat out reject the notion that you can strengthen Social Security by cutting it. Americans want fiscal sanity returned to Washington, but they don't believe it should be accomplished by cutting Social Security. Social Security benefit cuts are the last place you should look, not the first place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Simpson, Chairman Bowles, Congressman Reed, and Dr. Rivlin. How good to see you. I'm Susan Scanlon. As chair of the National Council of Women's Organizations, I speak for the 12 million American women who are part of this nonpartisan coalition. For 25 years, our 240 member organizations have collaborated through substantive policy work and grassroots activism to address issues of concern to women, like work-family balance, economic equity, education, fair pay, corporate accountability, and women's health. Just like their fathers, husbands, sons, and brothers, U.S. women believe that bringing the federal budget back in line is serious and necessary business. Our children and grandchildren should not be expected to bear the burden of fiscal irresponsibility that put us in this position. I commend you for taking on this tremendously difficult assignment and ardently hope for your success. It is important that you listen to those of us who did not cause but are struggling through this great recession. Unlike the bankers and financiers of Wall Street who brought us to the brink of economic calamity, your average woman on the street has not received a bailout. We're still working at low-wage jobs, more than half of which offer no paid vacation, retirement, or sick leave, let alone child care or transportation assistance. Right now, the nurses, teachers, secretaries, grocery store clerks, data processors, hairstylists, and waitresses whom I represent are grateful to have a job, even if they receive only 77 cents for every dollar their male counterparts earn. But that's a battle being waged on another front. What I ask you to understand is that such economic ghettoization has lifelong consequences as wives and women workers age. It is moms who drop out of the workforce to nurse aging parents or to raise children. How sad that building America's future is not just unrewarded, but penalized in our nation's economy. When retirement comes around, it's easy to explain why women in this country have little to no savings, pensions are few and far between, and they experience increasing poverty due to the death of or divorce from a husband. Right now, nearly half of women 65 and older living alone are poor. And this situation is even more grim for women of color and women with disabilities. We all recognize the bottom line that holds these lives together. It's Social Security, a contract American workers have made with their government to ensure at least a minimal standard of living when they grow too old or too sick to stay on the job. It would be an understatement to say that my 12 million membership is distressed by talk of balancing the budget via cuts to Social Security. Let's review the bidding on such proposals. Social Security has not contributed 1 red cent to the deficit. By borrowing from the trust, the government was able to issue bonds to build bridges, finance worthy social programs, and yes, wage wars. In 1983, the Dole Commission dealt with the approach of the pig and the python baby boomers so that the system will be solvent for nearly 30 years ahead. The so-called Social Security crisis has been manufactured by those who want to get their hands on this vast pot of money or to create some kind of intergenerational warfare. Suggestions about cutting benefits or raising the retirement age represent nothing less than the country's breaking its word with its most vulnerable citizens. Truly, America is better than that. Let's do the math. While the average Social Security benefit is $13,800, older women receive $2,000 less, or $11,800 a year, only about 56% of what they need to meet basic needs for food, rent, and medicine. You can't cut into a benefit that already verges on the official poverty line. Granted, well-educated, higher-income white men, a U.S. senator, for example, are living longer and healthier and might be able to continue working into their 70s. This does not hold true for low-income women and men with physically demanding jobs in a factory, a hospital, or a fast food restaurant. Try telling grandma that she can stand on her feet for a few more years, and that's if her employers are even willing to keep her on. I know that you are looking out for the next generation, for our grandchildren. So I'm here today speaking for today's and tomorrow's grandmas. The 12 million members of the National Council of Women's Organizations are ready, willing, and able to work with you to defeat the deficit. Give us a fair plan that eliminates the Bush tax cuts, ends 2 unfunded wars, and spreads the sacrifice amongst all who can afford it. Then we'll roll up our sleeves to work with you. But we will stand as one against any efforts to renege on this enduring and essential social contract by balancing the budget on our backs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a next group, please.
Two, but I don't think that matters, does it? I don't care.
You're 2?
I'm 2.
I'm 1. The order doesn't matter, just if you'll just start, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Michael Morris. I'm here as the director of the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University and also the director of the National Disability Institute. Both are not-for-profit research and development organizations dedicated exclusively to promoting work, savings, and asset building for people with disabilities nationwide. On behalf of both groups, we appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback to the National Committee on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. 1 in 5 adults in the United States have a disability, and over 22 million families nationwide have a member with a disability. This represents a 25% increase in disability incidence since 1990. Disability, as you know, cuts across race, gender, ethnicity, age, and geography. Whether occurring at birth or acquired later in life, individuals with disabilities are 3 times more likely than their non-disabled peers to live at or below the poverty line, twice as likely to be unemployed, and 7 times more likely to have a majority of their total income to be from public assistance resources. Over half of all working-age adults experience income poverty, reported disability. 65% of people experiencing long-term poverty, greater than 1 year, are persons with disabilities. A short-sighted approach for the Commission would be to reduce federal costs that focus on cutting benefits and services to this target audience. Such an approach would ignore the tremendous cost to the federal government, state governments, and all Americans that poverty and dependence cause. The GAO has found great need to look at better coordination among programs that serve people with disabilities, and perhaps the greatest problem has been identified as the federal infrastructure of disability support programs that don't offer a path to self-sufficiency. I want to propose to you a number of changes for you to consider. The U.S. government aids people in needs through payments, in-kind benefits, and services, but most social programs stop providing benefits if the resources to the beneficiary exceed certain thresholds that perpetuate the poverty status. I want to share with you several recommendations. First is consideration of the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, the ABLE Act, which would enact a tax-advantaged family savings program to encourage individuals with disabilities and families to set aside funds for future asset goals. There are over 185 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives and a growing number of co-sponsors in the Senate. This would provide parity to many families with a member with a disability that would actually better share the cost between the public and private sector. I also want to bring to your attention the Savings for Working Families Act, which would dramatically expand the opportunity for low-income people with and without disabilities to open individual development accounts, gain financial literacy, and realize specific asset goals. This program, estimates show, would, for every dollar invested by the federal government in IDAs, would yield a return of approximately $5 to the national economy in the form of new businesses, additional earnings, home purchases, and improved human capital. We propose several changes to the Social Security Act, which would also impact Medicaid. Raise the substantial gainful activity under SSI and SSDI, create a gradual reduction of benefits as citizens reach certain income limits. Reform asset limits for public benefits under the SSI and Medicaid program. Exempt certain category of assets, such as tax-preferred retirement accounts, education savings accounts, and others to help individuals with disabilities achieve self-sufficiency. Finally, require all SSI and SSDI beneficiaries to have a plan to achieve self-support with incentives for income growth and savings that must be updated at least annually. Each of these proposals may seem small in the context of the challenges that you face, but today you need to understand that 1.1 million children nationwide receive SSI benefits. 2/3 of these children are going to remain on benefits for life unless we realign programs to focus on advancing self-sufficiency rather than a lifetime sentence of poverty. The cost today, if we do not make this change, will be over $200 billion. The cost of the Social Security DI and SSI program will soon reach $1 trillion a year. We must refocus and realign these programs to focus on economic empowerment that will produce long-term projected savings in federal expenditures, real economic impact to communities, and a new pathway to economic self-sufficiency.
Chairman Bowles and Simpson, Dr. Rivlin, and Mr. Reed, my name is David Schlein. I am a senior labor economist from the National Education Association. On behalf of the 3.2 million members of the National Education Association, we offer these brief comments and written testimony. We are all concerned about the high levels of U.S. public debt and budget deficit. That concern can be overstated. Some observations from fiscal history might put the concern regarding debt into perspective. At the end of the Second World War, U.S. public debt approached 100% of GDP. However, the rapid growth of the post-war economy caused the debt ratio to fall by over half over the following 10 years, and over the subsequent 10 years by half again. Similarly, following the First World War, U.S. public debt had spiked in 1919, but rapid economic growth during the 20s caused the debt ratio to fall by over half by 1929. This was not a case of American exceptionalism. Great Britain, whose economy suffered more extensively than our own during World War II, had public debt equal to 2.5 times its GDP in 1950. However, economic growth cut the ratio by half in 1960 and half again by 1970. Britain experienced some of its highest growth during periods when its public debt was highest. The history of the U.S. and other nations shows us that it is possible to have economic growth even in the face of high debt. However, it is not possible to reduce debt without economic growth. These observations strongly suggest that the Commission can best meet its charge by reducing the federal debt and deficit by pursuing proven growth strategies such as investing in education, infrastructure, and technology. The first and most important step of the country is to get people back to work. NEA currently estimates that 150,000 educators may be laid off before school starts this fall. Protecting and creating jobs may mean that in the short term, the deficit goes up, but that may be a necessary step to enabling long-term economic growth. Therefore, we recommend that the Commission be extremely careful not to create unintended consequences by listening to those who put cutting the deficit above job growth and economic and social stability. Teachers and education support professionals, like the majority of middle-class Americans, rely on Social Security for their future. Educators are particularly vulnerable in their retirement security, both because of their comparatively low salaries and increasing attacks on their pension plans. In fact, Social Security is so important to NEA members that the organization's resolution on Social Security begins with the imperative, and I quote, "Social Security is a social contract between the U.S. government and its citizens that must never be breached." Educators would be hard hit if the Commission recommends increasing the retirement age. Educators who enter the classroom right out of college, as many do, already must work 43 to 45 years in their profession before qualifying for unreduced Social Security benefits. Additional increases in the retirement age would be a hardship for those who were not able to handle the rigors of teaching at a more advanced age. Some Social Security reform proponents have suggested requiring Social Security participation for all public employees as a means of strengthening the system. A federal mandate for public employee participation in the Social Security system would be detrimental to teachers and other public employees and would create additional financial burdens for states and city governments. NEA also strongly supports the repeal of the government pension offset and a windfall elimination provision. We urge the Commission to include these recommendations in your report to the President. Thank you very much, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Simpson and Bowles, and distinguished members of the Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Grisela Martinez, and I serve as the National Immigration Forum's Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs. We are a nonpartisan organization that advocates for the value of immigrants and immigration in the national interest. I recommend to this Commission that if we are to meaningfully improve our nation's economic outlook, we must reform our immigration laws to raise wages, create jobs, and generate additional tax revenue, and we must engage in more targeted, efficient, and accountable spending of discretionary funds dedicated to immigration and border enforcement. Overall federal government spending and appropriations in the last 2 decades on interior and border enforcement has been increasing at exorbitant rates, beginning with legacy INS and leading into more dramatic increases with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Existing immigration policies ignore practical solutions, while continuing enforcement-only spending without consideration of the long-term needs of our economy and the positive economic impact and stability that comprehensive immigration reform and more precise and accountable spending would achieve. We must deal with the economy we have, not the economy we wish we had. And like it or not, our economy includes 11 million undocumented individuals, or approximately 5% of our workforce. Numerous studies from both the right and left of the political spectrum point to the economic benefits of requiring undocumented immigrants to register with the federal government, learn English, pay taxes, and pass criminal background checks in order to remain in the U.S. and work toward citizenship. The Center for American Progress and the Immigration Policy Center released a report earlier this year estimating that comprehensive immigration reform would yield at least $1.5 trillion in cumulative U.S. gross domestic product over 10 years. Contrast this with the cost of mass deportation of undocumented immigrants or other enforcement-only proposals to the American taxpayer. Another study from CAP showed that the total cost of mass deportation and continuing border interdiction and interior enforcement efforts would be $285 billion over 5 years. A Congressional Budget Office analysis from 2007 estimated that mandating the E-Verify program for every employer in the U.S. without legalization would result in a loss of $17.3 billion in federal revenue over 10 years due to workers being paid outside the tax system. Both former current U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke have spoken about the negative economic effects of our current policies. New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg recently launched the Partnership for a New America Economy, a bipartisan coalition of U.S. mayors and business leaders making the economic case for immigration reform. In addition, though, to reform, there are other ways in which improvements to our policies could have positive economic effects. The Department of Homeland Security received just over $42.6 billion in fiscal year 10 appropriations, and that's not counting the supplemental to FY10 or the President's economic stimulus package, with at least $15.5 billion going towards immigration and border enforcement. DHS receives more discretionary funds than almost every other federal agency, even though congressional hearings, the DHS Inspector General, and the GAO have consistently found that DHS across many agency components lacks an ability to oversee its spending. We have more fiscal resources being directed to interior and border enforcement than ever before, and more on the way. Nowhere is this more evident than in spending for southern border enforcement and the immigration detention system. There's two things that I'd like to focus on today. Southwest border spending with more than 20,000 Border Patrol agents, several thousand more CBP officers, and thousands of more ICE, FBA, DEA, ATF, and CIA agents and U.S. Marshals at the southern border have seen a rapid growth in personnel in the recent years, which has outpaced their capacity for adequate training, supervision, and oversight. Border Patrol agents have killed 2 foreign nationals in the last month, and corruption concerns have risen as those ranks have swelled. Yet proposals continue to focus on increased hiring of thousands of more agents as well as National Guard. Yet the ports of entry continue to be ignored. Infrastructure, technology, staffing, agricultural, and other commercial inspection capabilities have seen no investment. Another example where common sense is trumped by rhetoric is our civil immigration detention system.
Can you try to wrap up, please?
Sure. I'll wrap up by saying alternatives to detention could be saving taxpayers millions of dollars. ATD programs cost approximately, according to DHS, average daily enrollment for one individual in an ATD program costs $8.88, contrasted to the cost of detention for one individual of $122 per day. I'll say that more than ever, our economy depends on getting immigration policy right. We need bipartisan leadership and support for reform and for fiscally sound enforcement policies that are smart, targeted, and effective, which prioritize quality over quantity, and which respond to facts and not fictions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chairman Simpson, Chairman Bowles, Dr. Rivlin. My name is Laurie Young, and I manage the Public Policy and Government Affairs Department of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. My particular portfolio is aging policy for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today as you consider recommendations to deal with our federal budget deficit. All of us who have our own debt understand the importance of reducing debt principal and controlling our increasing debt service. But I'm here today because of the increasing rhetoric surrounding the social safety insurance programs in this country, and it concerns me. I'm here because of the increasing drumbeat to consider cutting Social Security and the threat to promised benefits of all Americans afforded by this critical social insurance program. What's more, I'm here because LGBT people are heavily reliant on Social Security benefits as we age, or in the event that we become disabled. Many LGBT Americans are underemployed or live on the brink of poverty. For many of us, especially those of us who are disabled or over 65, Social Security is the only thing keeping a roof over our heads and food in our kitchens. We know that without Social Security benefits, the rate of poverty among all older adults would jump from just under 10% to over 50%. Nearly 90% of all elder households rely on at least partially on this social insurance program. Nearly a third rely entirely on it. If we don't keep Social Security's promised benefits intact, our seniors will face an enormous economic crisis, and it will hit the LGBT community especially hard. Consider these facts. The Williams Institute cites 12 studies showing a significant wage gap between homosexual and heterosexual men, ranging anywhere from 10 to 32% lower wages for the same jobs. The Williams Institute also notes that 22% of lesbian couples with children are classified as low-income households. Twice as many transgender people earn less than $10,000 a year than the population at large. The National Black Justice Coalition reported in 2004 that black same-sex couples have a lower median income than black heterosexual couples by as much as $10,000 a year. And the AIDS Community Research Initiative of America found that over 50% of older adults living with HIV/AIDS rely on Social Security disability as a primary source of income. Because of the cumulative effect of these disparities for LGBT people, our community is one of workers and families who have very little to set aside for our future. Social Security will be the most important economic safety net for our community when we are no longer able to work. And yet I would be remiss not to mention that this lack of financial stability in retirement is even complicated by the lack of federal recognition of our relationships, and including access to benefits. The impact on same-sex couples is enormous. In heterosexual married couples, the lower wage earner can receive a spousal benefit that reflects the benefits his or her spouse has earned over a lifetime. The lack of spousal survivor benefits can cost an LGBT retired worker thousands of dollars a year. Though heterosexual and same-sex couples are equally reliant on Social Security in retirement, lesbian couples receive an average of 31.5% less in Social Security, and gay couples receive 17.8% less, the difference often between survival and severe poverty. Now, I'm not asking you to fix that today. I know that's a discussion for another day, but I do want you to understand the complication that that brings in terms of economic stability and poverty in retirement. So I ask you today, as the members of this commission, to avoid the temptation to become Willie Sutton. It's a disservice to our people to try and rob us of promised benefits. Social Security can pay beneficiaries currently promised benefits in full until 2037 by using the $2.6 trillion surplus in its trust fund. While fiscal discipline is needed to reduce the federal debt, it should not come at the cost of hurting Social Security beneficiaries. Social Security has its own dedicated funding source, made up of payroll contributions from working Americans. Its funding is independent of the federal budget and therefore should not be a part of the deficit reduction discussion. Social Security can be more solvent by strengthening it, not by cutting benefits and balancing the budget on the backs of Social Security future recipients. You're not talking about cutting recipients who are receiving benefits today. You're talking about cutting benefits for our children and our grandchildren. So now is the time to protect the most successful anti-poverty insurance program for seniors, the disabled, and children. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next group, please.